Hello and welcome back, and that is right, today we want to talk about another DIY NAS board. Now, we have been talking about the Twin Lake processors from Intel for a while, more precisely the N150 and the N355, a 4-core and an 8-core and a 4-thread and an 8-thread respectively, CPU with a low TDP, which also gives you quite a decent little base to build a low-powered but pretty capable home NAS server from scratch. Now, we talked about CWWK before, or Changwang, here on the channel, and today we want to talk about a new board from them. This is the N150 or N355 10GBE equipped MITX motherboard here. It has a couple of 8643 4 SATA drive connectors supporting up to 8 hard drives on here. We've also got a couple of M.2 NVMe slots as well, up to 2280 length. We've also got DDR5 memory on board there. Pretty much this, with this PCIe upgrade slot and micro SD card slot and a couple of extra 2.5 gigs next to that 10G, is a heck of a lot to play with. And with a price point knocking around for about 250 to 230 nicker, I definitely wanted to get one here to talk about here in the studio. Now, before we carry on, I just want to highlight as well, in the very near future, we've got another NAS motherboard to watch out for soon, and this is a 1240p motherboard, the Intel processor inside. But one of the reasons I want to bring this up is this device is one of those ones I sort of referred to a while ago on the channel, where we were talking about scalability of MITX motherboards. Generally, MITX motherboards have got a reputation, although being low impact, also have low scalability. But CWWK are working on different accessories for these connectors, the 8643 connector there, and this connector here. These two little flat ones here on that side of the screen. We made a whole dedicated video about it. But the reason I bring it up now is when you're looking at this, yes, we're going to be talking about what it can do and what it can't do, but we also need to talk a little bit about scalability, and that is motherboards like this that are going to begin to support motherboard upgrades like this one. This is a 6 SATA to SF8643 adapter there, so you can add 6 more drives inside there. Or alternatively, you can go for something like this, where you can use one of those SF ports to go straight into 4 M.2 NVMe slots in there. So when I say this is an 8-bay board, keep in mind that that 8 lane going into there can be devised into other adapter cards to really scale this board out significantly. And although I am going to be using this motherboard in a Jonsbo N10 build video around the corner, I will say that those looking for a scale-out storage solution, start looking at SFP ports on Mobos. But that's enough of the old jibber jabber. Let's refocus on this board. Again, the CPU arrives already pre-attached with a silent ball bearing fan there on board to keep things cool. The connections, if we go on the bottom of the board, not only have we got those 3 network ports that we've already talked about there, we've got a couple of USB 2 ports. There's another USB 2 port, by the way, located on the board. You can use that for something like a unraid USB if you choose to. But on top of that, we've also got a USB Type A and a USB Type C port there, both which are 10 gig. We've also got a DisplayPort and an HDMI output there. I'll be straight. After doing all of my testing, I realised I didn't test the HDMI out. If I do get a chance to test it, I'm going to insert it here in the video. But other than that, let's carry on. So in terms of ports connectivity, quite a decent amount to play around with there. I also wanted to highlight again, you've got that SD card slot there at the base. Now, the reason I bring that up is some of you did ask in previous videos with the SD card slot, could you use that for an OS? I wouldn't recommend it. Maybe as your unraid loader if you wanted to instead of a USB, but I wouldn't put something like TrueNAS installed on that. Definitely wouldn't recommend it. But nonetheless, if you need, it's the local easy backup there for just utilizing of system configuration files to back up to periodically. That's actually quite a useful little thing to have. And it doesn't natively appear, by the way, on the storage manager. That's why it appeared during the TrueNAS installation I did on this. So again, no mucking around, it's good to go out of the box. But I will want to highlight in terms of ports connections that although, as mentioned, there is a PCIe slot, and that is a physical ×4 slot, that is actually a PCIe Gen 3 ×1 speed slot there at the bottom there. It's good to have it and 10GBE and the M2s, because generally a lot of MITX make you choose between those 3 things, and this manages to do all 3. It is worth remembering that that PCIe slot is shared between an M key slot underneath that is traditionally used for a Wi-Fi upgrade card. I know a lot of you are thinking, well, I'd never use one of those in a NAS anyway. Do keep in mind Unraid 7 has recently included the ability to take advantage of wireless adapters for your NAS. So don't immediately write that off. But still, nonetheless, it is good. That slot there's probably going to give you about 700 to 800 megs to play with a relevant PCIe card if you wanted to go for that. So that means you've got your 10 GBE, and I'll talk about lanes in a wee bit. But the PCIe slot there, you could use that for 2.5 gig, 5 gig upgrade card there. I wouldn't probably use it for a graphics card because it will limit it in the extreme. But if you wanted to go down that road, I would actually recommend using something like an Oculink to PCIe adapter. You're still going to be locked in at ×1 speed, that's Gen 3 ×1 again. But still, nonetheless, there is scalability there, and at least they've included it with those other facilities on the board. And going back to lanes there, I will highlight this 10 GBE, in some boards I've seen in the past when, lane distribution is pretty thin, and these Twin Lake CPUs, by the way, have only got 9 lanes to play with. This is still a Gen 3 ×2 connector. It's using the AQC113C controller there on a Gen 3 ×2 lane. That gives it 2 or 20 gigabit or 2 gigabytes per second, go with your terminology of choice, to play with this. You're looking about 1.6 to 1.8 bandwidth there afforded to that 10 gigabit connection. So you might be thinking, what tremendous waste. They've given 20 gigabit on a 10 gig connection. What that means is you're going to be able to achieve full 10 gig there, rather than when some people cut corners on their Mobos and assign a 3 ×1 lane on a 10 gig connection. The result for those users is they generally can't get out of about 880 megabytes per second. So I actually quite like that they established the lanes on a 10 gig connection there. Now, both of those SAS Fanout connections there go into ASM1164 4 SATA drive controllers inside. Now, they don't both feed into the same controller. This device actually establishes a separate controller for each of those connections. That means that both of them are running on a controller which there in themselves have a 3 ×1 lane speed each. Again, lovely stuff. It means if you wanted to take advantage of 4 SATA SSDs on there, you could not be too throttled. We will have to talk about throttling later on, but it's not actually that bad. Now, on top of that, we've got our 2 M.2 NVMe slots there. These are Gen 3 ×1, so you are going to be throttled down. Again, maximum probably between 800 and 900 megabytes per second, theoretically, and we will get onto the testing in a moment. But overall, it's still pretty good distribution. So ultimately, there's a decent amount of base storage here, whether you want to go for the scale out options with the SFP or just try and go for this as something like a Proxmox where you want to use just SSDs, and then maybe going down the road of adding additional SSDs with that card as mentioned earlier on. Now, in terms of performance, the 2 M.2 NVMe's, I funneled those out into that 10 GBE connection there on the rear. Now, in hindsight, I probably should have bonded 1 or 2 of those 2.5 gigs as well, but when I was doing the setup for this, I was actually utilizing this in a video coming soon on Hex OS, which kind of restricted some of my configuration options here. And I know I could go in via the TrueNAS core panel, or TrueNAS scale panel at the back end there, but I didn't want to muck around too much with the Hex OS. So I just restricted myself just to the 10 gig connection. And I'm pleased to say that performance-wise, it was all right. So when I did my ATO testing, when I was going for the 256 megabytes test, hopefully it's on the bottom of the screen now, when I went for the 256 megabyte test, I actually saturated it pretty well on both read and write. But once I went into the 1 gigabyte test and the 4 gigabyte test, performance numbers were about 650 to 700 in write. In read, it was large saturation. It didn't hugely surprise me. It's still good on a CPU like that to actually achieve saturation, but nonetheless, in terms of write performance, that is where efficiency CPUs like this tend to gut a ball out a little bit. So that was why we were seeing on average about 650 to 700, give or take around. Now, afterwards, I used our ugly Betty here, the Mobo test bench, and we used 4 Seagate SATA hard drives here, popped them into a RAID 1, and we went for a 10 gig connection there. And in ATO, that gave me about 580 to 550 on average. It kind of spiked on the read occasionally at 800, but I didn't take that too seriously. So again, I saw decent enough numbers with the hard drives there, but keep in mind, There are 2 of those connections there on board, so you could probably scale that up quite well. And finally, I went ahead and tapped in via terminal and then went ahead and wanted to see what the individual performance of these would be with those repeated tests that we normally do. Now, in terms of read performance, the SSDs gave us 720 megabytes per second read on average. Again, we tested those, and that was on a 3x1. So again, that's pretty much close to full saturation on a 3x1 lane. And the repeated 1 gig write testing on here, we went ahead, same tests again, and this time we only saw about 520 megabytes per second on average there. Again, not a huge surprise. These CPUs always tend to really scatter things in the write. It's not terrible, but it's not out of this world. Now, this was the N150 version, not the N355, but both of these CPUs we've tested for Plex on the channel before. I can already tell you they're pretty darn good when it comes to Plex Media Server. The N150 in particular was especially lean in terms of its power consumption versus its capability in 4K and even 8K playback. Transcoding of 8K largely off the table, but 4K did very, very well. And again, for its scale and its price point, I can't really fault it there. In terms of memory, the system arrived with a SODIMM slot there. That's DDR5 non-ECC. Again, look at the price point. But this SODIMM slot here, it only goes up to 4800 megahertz speed. You can put in greater than that, but you are going to be capped down to that. So ultimately, that CPU and that memory combo there, I think this is one of the best examples of the lanes that CPU affords being divided out so meticulously. Hopefully there's the graphic here on screen, but the diagram there, notwithstanding the sharing of the SD card and that M2 key slot, they have really done well pairing things out, and it was, again, especially impressive. Even despite that lean lane quantity at their disposal, they still went ahead and assigned ×2 speed to the 10GBE, so fair respect. Next up, let's talk about power consumption. So that CPU has a 6-watt TDP on its own, but it's not on its own, is it? This has got all kinds of gubbins wrapped around it. So I went ahead and did 2 individual tests, 2 different scenarios. The first test was using the N150 CPU, 8 gig of DDR5 memory. I had both of these M.2 NVMe's being accessed, and that was via 10GBE. So overall, that came in at between 90 and 20 watts power consumption during those tests. It went down to about 15 to 16 when the 10G and the SSDs weren't in live active SSH repeat testing. But overall, although that isn't the 6-watt TDP that is reported, once you factor in the bells and whistles that I'd added on there, I was quite happy with that. But what if we scaled things up? So next up, I went ahead using the Ugly Betty to attach those 4 SATA hard drives. I then attached a PCIe card, with that PCIe card being the Oculink one, but I didn't connect anything to it. It was just there, ready, waiting to be connected to. I had the 10G connection, and I did 2 M.2 NVMe's. I wasn't accessing any of the media. I just had everything on, just general idle. It wasn't in hyper hibernation or standby. It was just in idle, and that came in at 31.3 to 31.4 watts utilization. Again, a big jump up from the original 6 watts there, but keep in mind 4 Seagate Iron Wolves, 2 NVMe's, the PCIe drawing a little bit for itself, and the 10GBE connection overall. I'm still happy with that, and certainly not ideal, but it's pretty close for the kind of hardware spec we're looking at here. Again, call it a solid 6-7 out of 10. Overall, I'm really pleased with what I found here. This board gives me a level of flexibility in MITX motherboards in 2025 that just isn't available elsewhere. We have seen the N100 and the N355 version of this about 12 to 18 months ago, and this actually improves upon that formula, notwithstanding it's very, very similar in the ports and connections it offers. But now, of course, we've got a great degree of flexibility of what we can add to this device. We've got the PCIe alongside the 10GBE, alongside the M.2 NVMe, all on that single board, and the price point is still pretty darn good. And with pre-built N150 and N355 CPU NAS devices in the market right now, for only 100 to 150 more than this, but lacking 10GBE, lacking some of the flexibility and upgradability of this, it makes this thing even more impressive. Now, there are links below in order to get hold of one for yourself. There are other boards out there, you know, like this 10GBE beauty that I'm going to be reviewing soon, but I like this, and I'm going into more detail with the testing I'm going to carry on with in the written review below. I'll link to a few different retail outlets that I can find that list this. I'll go with their own website, maybe in AliExpress and a few others. So if you want to go ahead and use those links. And if you found this video helpful, using those links to sites like Amazon or AliExpress result in a commission that me and Eddie here at NAS Compares get to use to allow us to keep doing what we do. But apart from that, thank you so much for watching. If you want to see more of this board or suggesting another test, do let me know in the comments.